Whenever you program squats into your workout, you are expecting a world of pain. The thing is, we want that pain in certain areas. We want it in our quads, glutes, and hamstrings. That's why we're training the squat in the first place. When that pain progresses into our lower back, that's when you potentially have problems. Lower back pain after squats can feel horrible, and it can get worse than that too. It can take you out of sync from your training period and keep you out of the gym. It can wreck your everyday life, and it's just not gonna make squatting fun. It's just not gonna make squatting an exercise that you're looking forward to. The thing with lower back pain is we can usually get in front of it. If we prepare the right way, and if we dial in our form properly, we're gonna avoid that issue. So let's look at the 4 most common reasons why you might be getting lower back pain from your squats and exactly how we can fix them in just a couple minutes. Before we dive into our 4 specific issues that might be causing lower back pain, we've got to understand the difference between good lower back pain and bad lower back pain. Because yes, there is sometimes a situation where our lower back is going to feel it the day after squats. You've got to keep in mind that no matter whether you're doing your squat well or not, your spinal erectors, these thick muscles that kind of support our spine and help pull us into spinal extension, they are active during the squat and they're helping us straighten up as we stand up on every single rep. That means they're getting work, and if you go heavy enough, if you pile up enough reps, your spinal erectors might feel it the day after. If they're a little bit sore, that's okay. The point where this becomes bad back pain though is when that erector soreness is different from side to side. If you have a strain on one of your spinal erectors, say on the left side, but the right side feels fine, that's when we might have an issue. The other point where you might have an issue is when you're not really feeling it in the muscle at all, and we're feeling it in the spine, we're feeling it in our discs. That's the other time where we have an issue. So make sure you understand the difference. It's okay to be sore in your lower back after you're done squatting. What you want to avoid is that uneven soreness or soreness that is not coming from your spinal erectors and is coming from your spine instead. Now we're going to run through the 4 main reasons that are going to cause lower back pain during your squat. The first of these is really very simple. It's you're not warming up enough. Your spinal erectors, especially if you spend your entire day sitting, they're not a muscle that is generally tight. In fact, they're very lax when we're just sitting at our jobs. So what we actually really need to do is get them ready to train. And if we don't really prepare them properly, and if we don't understand the movement that our spine is really capable of during the squat, then we're just not gonna have the awareness, and we're gonna drop down into that first heavy rep, and it's very, very easy for one of them to get tight or for one of them to strain. So what we want to think about is how we warm up for the squat. We're not just going to step under, say 225 pounds and immediately back squat it, but we want to go through a little bit of a warm up. And we can keep this pretty simple. It doesn't need to take a lot of time, but you want to spend, a little bit of time just mobilizing your spine and moving your erectors through a full range of motion. And we can do that with a simple move called the cat-cow. Now, this is a very common warm-up exercise. It's a very easy warm-up exercise. And the benefit of doing the cat-cow, specifically for the squat, is that we're taking our spinal erectors through that full range of motion. When we are in the arch position, our spinal erectors are flexed, and you want to think about that, especially if you're using this as a warm-up to your squat. And once we round our back into that hollow position, our spinal erectors are getting really, really good stretch. So we're preparing our erectors for work, and we're starting to create a little bit of blood flow there. You're also starting to create a lot of awareness for yourself personally about what your spine is capable of. When we are generally doing a squat, we want to think about having our spine in neutral. You're going to be able to find neutral because you have rounded your back and you have arched your back aggressively. So we're gonna start with that. You wanna do that, say 2 rounds of that. You don't need to spend a whole ton of time here. 40 seconds on, 20 off. Once you're done with that, we can do other warm-up exercises, and it never hurts to get a couple Spider-Man lunges in there. If you're in a rush though, you can immediately jump into squatting, but you're not gonna start with your work weight. Instead, what we wanna do is we wanna start with the bar, and you're literally just going to perform squats with the bar. Get your warm-up down that way, understand how your erectors feel, understand how your lower back feels, and understand your squat form. With that, this is also gonna help you too in the long run. If you warm up like this, you're gonna be a lot more powerful in your squat long term. From there, think about getting 33% of your training weight on the bar, whatever you really want to train at, and let's do another 5 reps. Then you'll put 66% of your training weight on the bar, get another 3 to 5 reps, and then you're into your work set. After you're done with that warm-up, your erectors will be ready for action. So the next 3 mistakes we're gonna look at are not about what you're doing before you're squatting. There's something you're doing as you're squatting. And the first of these is easily the most common and the one you're gonna hear about the most in the gym. That is, you're rounding your back as you lower into the bottom of the squat. This is essentially the dreaded butt wing, where we're really not in control of our hips as we're lowering into the squat. And as a result, we wind up rounding our back in that bottom position. Some people can get by with this and they're not gonna have back pain either because they've built up a lot of tolerance or they have a certain level of resiliency just to start. But for most of us, this is not a great position to squat from, and here's why. When we're lowering into that rounded back position, very similar to us rounding our back during cat-cow, our spinal erectors are in a relaxed position, and that is not a position that can really support our spine, especially when we have a load on our back. Then when we try to instantly get those muscles to go from that relaxed position at the bottom of our squat rep into a contracted position so that we can get our back in neutral and drive up from the squat, that doesn't necessarily work well. So how do we get around that? There are two things that we can do to solve this. The first of these is when you're starting all your squat reps, make sure to start by pushing your butt back. That's gonna, in theory, help us to maintain a little bit more of a neutral spine as we lower and avoid rounding. Think of your butt being the body part that goes the farthest back when you squat and keep everything else ever so slightly in front of it. This will help you maintain a neutral spine as you're squatting, and it's one way that we can fix this butt wink issue. The other thing that we can do very often if that's not working for you, the simple fix is don't go quite that deep. You want to actually take video of yourself when you're squatting, take it from a profile angle, that way you can see how you're lowering into your squats, and do this while you're warming up. If you're rounding, then you're gonna be very quickly see that you get to a certain point in your depth and you just run out of space for your hips to go backwards and you run out of space for your knees to translate forward, and your body is simply compensating by rounding your back. That means you're going a little deep at this point for your mobility. Yes, you wanna be able to get deep into a squat. At some point, you wanna have the capacity to squat ass to grass, but that doesn't mean you're ready for it now, so you just need to cut your squat depth a little bit. That should very quickly solve this butt wink issue. The second issue we're gonna run into every so often is the exact opposite of rounding our back as we lower, and that is excessively arching your back as you lower. And essentially, this is an overcorrection for rounding our back. We're taught and we learn very quickly that we shouldn't round our back in the gym. Any gym bro will tell you that. And so as a result, we try to arch our back excessively to compensate for that. And we think it's a nice, safe position. And the truth is, it is a relatively safe position for the discs or our spine when we're squatting. But because we're in that very, very shortened position for our erectors and they're staying in that position, they can eventually get very sore and you can wind up feeling this. So how do we avoid this excessively arched back position when we're squatting? What we're really playing for on all of our squats, whether we're doing a front squat or a back squat or a goblet squat, is we want to keep our spine neutral. So the two things we can do, the easiest form fix is one, we're going to think about not letting our rib cage flare when we're squatting, and I'm going to think about keeping my abs nice and tight. What that's going to do is instantly when I'm not flaring my rib cage, pulling my abs downwards is going to get my lumbar spine a lot more organized, and it's going to help me maintain a neutral position. So that is your first fix. If that doesn't work, or if that's not really comfortable for you while you're squatting, then the other thing we're going to do is we're going to switch the squat variation that we're doing. Instead of doing back squats, which really invite us into that excessively arched back position, we're gonna switch to a goblet squat. And this is a nice, safe squat that you can still load. It's a very underestimated squat in that regard. And to be honest, if you have not maxed out the dumbbells in your gym on the goblet squat, you really don't need to be back squatting in the first place. But when we switch to the goblet squat, it's gonna help us organize ourselves a little bit, organize our form a little bit, and that's gonna help get us out of that horrible habit of excessively arching our back. It's gonna save us a little bit of back soreness the day after. And perhaps the most advanced issue we're gonna see in the squat that can lead to lower back pain is something called the good morning fault. And essentially what's happening here, when we do this good morning fault, essentially what happens is we try to straighten at the knees first, and then we try to straighten at the hips after that. That leaves us in a really vulnerable position, a lot of times with a lot of load if we're doing a very heavy back squat, where our chest is tipped forward and our lower back has to take all the strain. We've offloaded the squat from our quads and our hamstrings and our glutes, and we've placed it in our glutes a little bit, but mostly on those erectors, which then have to really flex hard in order to get us to stand up. That is a recipe for something to pull. It is also not the best way to really get a good leg burn out of our squats. So how do we avoid this mistake? Once again, what we're going to do is we're going to switch squat styles so that we can perfect our form with something else. And in this case, we're gonna go to a squat that's going to allow us to still move some load, but it's really gonna instantly indicate if we are shifting our hips forward or if we're out of balance in our squat. We're gonna go to something called the Frankenstein squat. And essentially on this squat, instead of holding the weight with our hands and instead of placing any pressure on our erectors, all we're gonna do is we're going to essentially rest the weights on our shoulders with our hands out. And in this position, if our torso tips forward at all, if we get even close to that good morning fault, essentially the entire bar is going to roll off of us. We don't want that to happen. So simply because of that, it's going to gradually clean up your squat form. And if you stick with that for say 3 to 4 weeks, you'll gradually start to understand how your spine is supposed to move in the squat and how to avoid that good morning fault, and you'll get out of that bad pattern. So those are 4 of the most common reasons that you might be dealing with lower back pain when squatting. And the great thing about these 4 issues is they're super correctable. As long as you implement these changes and gradually gain more mastery over your form, you're going to avoid lower back pain in your squat. And that means that we can keep the burn exactly where we want it on our quads, hamstrings, and glutes. And we're going to see those muscles grow, and we can do that and keep loading and keep getting stronger.